A billionaire known for her arrogant attitude mocked a humble cleaning employee, declaring, "If you play this piano, I'll marry you." She could never have imagined that that night would bring the biggest shock of her life. The unfolding events changed everything forever, and you won't believe the outcome of this story. The atmosphere was perfect. The luxurious hotel glowed with golden lights, which reflected off the polished marble of the main hall. It was another Thursday dedicated to an elegant charity gala, the kind of event that the city's high society enjoyed attending. Men, in expensive suits, elegant tuxedos, and champagne glasses in hand, the elite circulated through the main hall, engaged in whispered conversations about business and trivial matters. Roberto Mendez, 30, moved his cleaning trolley through the corridors parallel to the hall, seeking maximum discretion. 5 years working at that hotel had taught him. To the elite, employees like him were almost invisible, and he liked that situation. Fewer complications, less fuss. The trolley creaked subtly. On his way to the main hall, Roberto noticed some glasses scattered on side tables that needed to be cleared before the main speech. He adjusted his navy blue uniform, checking that everything was in order, and entered the hall with light steps. The space was magnificent. Crystal chandeliers suspended from the high ceiling cast rays of light onto the round tables adorned with impeccably smooth white tablecloths. White and gold floral decorations embellished each table, and a modest stage. At the back of the room, an elegantly positioned black grand piano awaited the pianist, who would perform later. Roberto began his task in silence, collecting empty glasses and ashtrays. The party guests chatted animatedly, oblivious to his presence. He acted exactly as he preferred, discreet, efficient, almost imperceptible. It was at that moment that she appeared. Valentina Montero entered the hall with the aura of someone who truly dominated it. And, in fact, at 30, she was inheriting an empire that included hotels and construction companies. Investments were spread throughout the country. Her blood-red dress contrasted impeccably. Diamonds sparkled on her neck and wrists, each precious stone worth more than the home of an ordinary family. She was the main supporter of the evening's charity event, present out of social obligation. The facade had to be maintained, and donating was a price to pay for a good public reputation. Roberto intensified his work, now more vigilant of the movements around him. Valentina moved among the guests with a calculated smile, greeting them. Influential personalities, posing for photographs, attracted attention. "Dear business leaders, I hope you will all contribute generously, as we need to help." The impact was subtle, but the champagne she was holding slipped, staining her face, which contorted with rage. All eyes turned to her. Her heart was racing. "I'm sorry, ma'am, it was an accident. I just slipped on the stairs." "You ruined my dress. Do you know how much it costs?" Valentina laughed, but there was no joy in it. "Honey?" With his cleaner's salary, he seemed to shrink under the weight of all those accusing glances. "Did you witness that?" Valentina, looking indignant, turned to the other guests. "This man is the perfect example of how some people are destined to be invisible, to clean up other people's messes, and not to be in the company of real people." "Please," Mr. Roberto murmured, almost in a whisper. "Please what?" Valentina was taking advantage of the situation, that was obvious. "Do you want me to pretend nothing happened? Nothing? Do you think people like you are worth the same as people like us?" It was at that moment that a malicious gleam appeared in her eyes. She fixed her gaze on the piano on the stage and then on Roberto, a cruel smile spreading across her lips. "You know what?" she exclaimed, raising her voice so that everyone could hear her. "If you can play that piano better than any professional musician, I'll—" The room was filled with laughter. Valentina applauded, pleased with her own wit. Everyone heard it. "And the staff? The technician will give us a solution." Roberto looked at the piano, then at Valentina, then at all those expressions of contempt around him. Something stirred inside him, a mixture of indignation, shame, and longing. But of course it wouldn't be possible. Valentina enjoyed every moment of the situation. People like you only know how to erase music, art, culture. This is for people like us, for those who have culture, elegance. The guests nodded in agreement, some already moving to leave. The show was over, but Roberto did not take his eyes off the piano. Valentina noticed that he was motionless, and her irritation grew. What was happening? Had he lost the ability to speak or finally understood his role in this world? Roberto took a deep breath. For years, he had been the ideal employee, discreet, efficient, almost non-existent. But at that moment, something inside him cried out for liberation, something he had buried long ago. "I accept," he said, his voice low but firm. A sudden silence fell over the room. "Valentina," he blinked as if he hadn't understood. "What was that?" Roberto raised his face, meeting her gaze for the first time that night. "I said I accept. I'll play the piano." Valentina's laughter echoed through the hall, crystal clear and vibrant. "My God, does he really think he can do it? This is even better than I imagined." The silence that followed was heavy. Roberto could feel his own heart pounding as hundreds of eyes watched him. Some guests had already taken out their mobile phones, were ready to capture what Valentina considered a monumental humiliation. Valentina couldn't contain her laughter. "Are you seeing this?" she exclaimed. "Does he really think he can play the piano?" She turned to her friends who were with her. "Mariana, are you recording? This is going on social media." Roberto swallowed hard, his hands sweaty. He wiped them carefully on his uniform trousers. How long had it been since he last played the piano? 5, 6 years? It seemed like a lifetime. Wait, exclaimed Valentina, raising her hand as if she had experienced one. A brilliant idea came to her. "How can we make this more interesting?" she suggested, opening her designer handbag and taking out a wallet full of banknotes. £500 if he could play an entire song without making a mistake. Those present murmured, some with a malicious smile. Roberto realized that this was not generosity, but blatant humiliation. Valentina was offering money as if he were an artist in a show, exposed to the public. 1,000, exclaimed someone in the crowd, a burly businessman with a cigar between his lips. 1,000 reis if he doesn't win. In the first 30 seconds, laughter echoed. Roberto felt his face burn, but not from embarrassment. It was anger, an emotion that had dominated him for years. Ever since... "No," he refused, his voice now more decisive. "I don't want your money." Valentina raised an eyebrow. "Oh, no. Then what do you want?" "I already told you. If I do better than a professional, or would you prefer something more practical?" "I just want you to keep your promise," Roberto replied, impressed with his own boldness. The room erupted in laughter. The laughter intensified. Valentina was almost falling over from laughing so hard. "Do you really think I would marry you?" I asked. Roberto replied calmly in front of everyone. "My dear," said Valentina, wiping away a tear from laughing so hard, "that was a joke. I would never marry someone like you. But let's have some fun. Play your 3 notes, take some photos for Instagram, and then go back to your cleaning trolley. What do you say?" Roberto began walking towards the piano. The piano. Each step was heavy, as if he were swimming in thick water. The guests moved away, forming a human path to the instrument. Everyone watched in disbelief. Was he really going to try? Valentina laughed excitedly. "Should someone tell the pianist we hired? He'll want to see this." Roberto stopped in front of the piano, a stunningly beautiful Steinway & Sons Model D. The keys glistened under the light of the chandeliers, each one impeccably positioned. With a gentle touch, he reached out and caressed the lid, feeling the texture of the wood. It polished under his fingers. "What are you waiting for?" Valentina teased. "Divine inspiration?" Roberto turned to look at her for the first time that night, his face serious. "What song would you like to hear?" The question surprised him. She had expected him to simply try to play something simple and embarrass himself. "What did you say?" I asked. "What song?" "What would you like to hear?" Roberto repeated, his voice strangely calm. Now Valentina found herself in a brief gaze with his. Friends, the situation was not unfolding as she had imagined. The cleaner should have been terrified, begging to escape. But he seemed calm. "Anything," she said, trying to regain control. "Play Happy Birthday, that'll be fine." More applause from the audience. However, Roberto did not smile. He just nodded and pulled up the piano stool. The leather was soft and well-maintained. He adjusted the height of the seat and placed his hands on the keys. For a few moments, the hall fell silent. Even the laughter stopped. Everyone waited anxiously for the spectacle of humiliation to unfold. Roberto closed his eyes. For a moment, he was no longer in that sumptuous hotel, surrounded by merciless people. He found himself back in his 20s, in a small conservatory, with his teacher whispering in his ear, "Feel the music, Roberto. Don't think about the keys. Feel the music." His hands touched the keys, as if they had an eternal connection with them. He opened his eyes and fixed his gaze on Valentina. "This is dedicated to you, ma'am," he said, and began to play. The first notes flooded the hall like a gentle breeze. Roberto started with something familiar, a melody recognizable to everyone. But there was a distinct nuance. Each note was crystal clear, flawless, charged with an emotion that no one had anticipated. The hall fell into a deep silence. The laughter ceased, the comments fell silent. Even the waiters circulating with plates stopped to listen attentively. A cold sensation gripped Valentina's stomach. Something was wrong. The cleaning man should not have demonstrated such musical talent. No one imagined that he actually had any musical knowledge. But Roberto not only knew music, he lived music. His fingers glided across the keys with an elegance that stood in stark contrast to his modest work uniform. Every movement was precise, controlled, yet charged with emotion. The simple melody he had initially played began to evolve. Roberto added complex harmonies with variations that demonstrated a comprehensive knowledge of music theory. What had started as a familiar melody was evolving into something unique, something of his own. Concern set in. This was not what they wanted. It wasn't fun at the expense of an innocent person. It was art. Valentina clenched her fists. How dare that man play her like that? How dare he be so skilled? People like him didn't deserve talent, shouldn't have aspirations, shouldn't exist beyond what she had defined for them. But Roberto persisted in his playing, indifferent to the looks of surprise and embarrassment that surrounded him. For him, at that moment only, the music was present, and the music was the relief of 5 years of silence. Roberto finished the first song with a soft cadence that dissipated through the hall like a whisper. The silence that followed was different from before. It did not carry the tension of expectation, but rather sincere amazement. Keeping his eyes fixed on the piano, he did not hesitate to start a second piece. This time he opted for something more challenging, a sonata that required advanced technique and years of dedication to play perfectly. Roberto's fingers moved quickly over the keys, dancing with a mastery that left the audience mesmerized. Every note was perfect, every musical phrase a complete narrative. It wasn't just impeccable technique, but an exceptional interpretation, the kind of performance only seen in the most prestigious concert halls in the world. Valentina felt the ground give way beneath her feet. This couldn't be real. The musician, the same man she had humiliated minutes before, was playing with a skill she had only witnessed at high-profile concerts. Thousands of pounds to witness the performance. "My God," whispered a guest, an older woman than Roberto, recognizable as the wife of a renowned businessman. The way he played was that of a virtuoso. The word virtuoso spread among those present in low whispers. Mobile phones that had been raised to record a humiliation now recorded something completely different. Some guests approached the piano, drawn to the music as if by a magnetic force. Roberto felt every part of himself being reborn. It was as if he had passed into a state of, after years of sleep, he had finally awakened. His hands remembered every movement, every subtlety he had learned in a past life. The music flowed through him like a river that, after long years of being dammed up, had finally found its way to the sea. He adjusted the tone to something more dramatic, intensifying the piece. The piano responded to each touch as if it were an integral part of itself. Roberto had forgotten the intensity of this feeling, the perfect union between musician and instrument when technique is perfected. The stage became invisible, leaving only pure artistic expression. Valentina struggled to remain calm, but she felt restless. She looked around and realized she was not alone in this state. The guests had stopped laughing and were now actively listening. "Who is this man?" someone asked in a low voice. "How can a simple cleaning employee play with such mastery?" whispered another. Roberto finished the second piece with a series of powerful chords that echoed through the hall like approaching thunder. On this occasion, when the silence returned, it lingered. Just seconds before being interrupted by something unexpected, the room exploded into applause. It started with one person, then two, until half the room joined in, applauding. It was not the polite applause of a social event, but sincere and admiring applause, the kind of ovation reserved for true artists. Roberto finally looked up from the piano and met Valentina's gaze. She saw something in him that made her take a step back. He was no longer the dejected man of a few minutes earlier. He was a person who had rediscovered his true identity. "Impressive," said a powerful voice that stood out from the crowd. Roberto looked up and saw an elegant man approaching. He recognized the face immediately. It was a renowned music critic, someone whose opinions could determine the success or failure of artistic careers. It had been a long time since he had heard a performance of such caliber. Valentina felt fear begin to take hold. Everything was going according to plan. What should have been a malicious prank was turning into something uncontrollable. What would be the next step? Where did he come from? The critic asked. Looking at Roberto, the question hung in the air. Roberto hesitated, as these were treacherous waters. Revealing too much about his past would mean having to explain his situation. Why was he working as a cleaner when he clearly had talent for much more, for a place like the National Conservatory? With a concise answer, he simply stated. A murmur of surprise ran through the crowd. The National Conservatory, a nationally renowned musical institution, only accepted the most exceptional talents. "And she works here?" The question came from the elegantly dressed woman. Roberto did not recognize the answer. He looked away, for life does not always follow the planned path. The answer, for a moment, appeased their curiosity, but Roberto could feel the minds stirring around him. People were beginning to realize that there was more to his story than met the eye. Valentina, for the most part, regained her composure. She couldn't let the situation get out of hand. "Very well," she said, her voice a little louder than usual. "You have musical talent. Congratulations, now you can return to work." But Roberto remained seated at the piano bench. I thought he wanted to hear more. No, that was just me. Valentina began to play, but was abruptly interrupted by a voice from the audience. "We want more," someone exclaimed. "Yes, play another one," agreed another. In an instant, a chorus of voices rose, all asking Roberto to continue. Valentina looked around, frightened, realizing that she had completely lost control of the situation. Roberto, for the first time that night, smiled. It was not a smile of mockery or victory. It was a smile of pure joy, the smile of someone who had rediscovered something he believed was lost forever. "How about something more challenging?" he asked, fixing his gaze on Valentina. She knew she should refuse, that she should put an end to it all right then and there, but, surrounded by so many people, she didn't have the courage. "Do whatever you want," she whispered. Roberto nodded and, with his hands on the keys, chose one of the most complex pieces in the classical repertoire. It was a piece of music that only a few pianists in the world were capable of playing. Perfectly. The first notes emerged subtle and precise, like raindrops. Then the music gained strength, expanding like a storm forming on the horizon, growing in intensity and complexity. Roberto tackled the most challenging passages with such naturalness that the music critic was left speechless. His hands glided across the keyboard in a fluid, elegant movement, as if dancing. Scales with wide intervals between octaves moved like musical roller coasters, chords that challenged the independence of the fingers, each playing at different rhythms. Everything happened simultaneously, with a mastery that bordered on the supernatural. Valentina felt as if she were watching her own humiliation in slow motion. With every note Roberto played, it was a slap in the face to her arrogance. Each musical composition was a reminder of how she had completely underestimated this individual. The audience was completely enchanted. Some had tears in their eyes, while others recorded the moment on their mobile phones, not to ridicule, but to preserve the memory of something exceptional they were witnessing. Roberto reached the peak of his performance, his hands dancing over the keys in a whirlwind of sound and emotion that made the chandelier in the hall tremble subtly. And with mastery, he brought the music back to serenity, ending with the same subtle raindrops with which he had begun. The silence that followed was infinite, until the hall erupted, not in laughter but in thunderous applause. The audience rose from their seats, applauding with an energy that Roberto had not witnessed in a long time. "Ah, bravo!" he exclaimed. "Extraordinary!" echoed another voice. Valentina looked around her, witnessing her social world change abruptly. The man she had labeled invisible was being applauded by the same elite who had ridiculed him minutes before. And cruelest of all, she had promised to marry him if he played better than a professional, and everyone had heard that promise. The applause still echoed through the hall as Roberto finally rose from the piano chair. His legs were shaking, not from nervousness, but adrenaline pulsed through his veins. It had been so long since he had last felt this way, alive, complete, truly himself. "Incredible," murmured the music critic, shaking his head in admiration. "Truly incredible. How was it possible that such talent existed?" He hesitated, realizing the delicacy of the moment. Valentina tried to compose herself, but her hands trembled with emotion. She took a glass of champagne from a moving tray and drank it in one gulp. She needed a moment to reflect, "They're looking for a way out of this impossible situation," said an elegant lady, approaching Roberto. "Forgive me for intruding," she continued, "but I'm convinced I've met you before. Your face looks familiar." Roberto felt a chill run through his body. It was exactly the situation he had been avoiding for 5 years, being recognized, forced to explain, reliving everything all over again. "I think you're mistaken, madam," Roberto replied, politely, as he began to move away from the piano. But the woman insisted. No, I'm absolutely certain. You played at concerts, wasn't it?" A few years ago, a spark of recognition lit up her eyes. "My God, you're Roberto Mendez, the pianist." A deathly silence fell over the room. Roberto closed his eyes for a moment, aware that there was no escape. The past had finally caught up with him. "Roberto Mendez," repeated another guest, a gentleman with gold-rimmed glasses. "I remember," he said. "You were considered one of the greatest talents of the new generation. He played at the Municipal Theater when he was 22. "My God, really?" someone exclaimed. He was there that night. It was incredible. But you just disappeared." Roberto felt the weight of everyone's gaze on him. The same class that moments before had been amused by his situation now watched him with a mixture of bewilderment and curiosity. The abrupt change from renowned musician to janitor was shocking. Valentina felt like she was watching a horror film. With each new discovery, his situation became more desperate. He wasn't just a skilled janitor, he was a renowned professional musician. His promise of marriage was becoming more and more in real time, with every passing second. "Why did you stop playing?" someone in the crowd asked. Roberto glanced at the floor. Even after all these years, the memory still caused him pain. Some things in life transcend dreams. His answer, concise but enigmatic, only intensified the curiosity. People approached, forming a circle around him. Roberto felt trapped, like a chained animal. Then a familiar voice broke the silence. "I remember the story." Everyone turned to see who it was. It was Donna Marina, the hotel's longest-serving housekeeper, who had spent more than 2 decades in its corridors and knew every corner and every story. Roberto looked at her with pleading eyes, silently begging her to keep the secret. Donna Marina, however, had her own reasons for speaking. She had witnessed Roberto's humiliation minutes earlier, and now saw a chance to restore his dignity. "Roberto stopped playing music 5 years ago," she said, the expression on her face revealing the emotional weight of the experience. Then, the death of Roberto's parents in the car accident caused a murmur of grief among the crowd. Roberto closed his eyes, deep pain settling in his chest. An only child, Roberto listened to Donna Marina continue, revealing that his parents had spent all their resources to finance his music studies. Upon learning of the tragedy, Roberto discovered that the family was in debt. To pay off the debts, he was forced to sell everything he owned, including his piano, amid a religious silence from the audience. By then, Valentina had given up trying. She was looking for a way out and was absorbed in the story. But he could have continued his career, someone said. He could have found support, made it to the stage. Donna Marina shook her head. You don't understand. Roberto didn't give up just for financial reasons. He stopped because music transported him too much to his parents. Every chord he played was a tear for them. Roberto felt tears burning in his eyes, as if he were hearing it for the first time in 5 years. He started working immediately. Donna Marina continued. He believed that, away from the stage, away from the piano, he would be able to erase music from his mind. But music cannot be erased. It resides in the soul of each person. Why didn't you ever tell us this? Asked the music critic, truly moved. Roberto finally found his voice, for he was not seeking anyone's compassion. He just wanted to work in peace and rebuild his life, far from all that turmoil. But you wasted 5 years of talent, someone protested. I didn't waste it, Roberto replied, his voice growing firmer. I discovered other things I learned about. His speech touched on humility, dignity in work, and treating people well. I learned that a person's value does not lie in their actions, but in their essence. His words reverberated through the hall, like a silent message that many of those present had never considered. For them, employees like Roberto were, in fact, invisible. Valentina felt as if each word was a blow, for she herself had called Roberto invisible. He had said he was born to clean up other people's messes, and now she realized he was an artist, who had sacrificed his dreams for his family. But why play now? Asked the same woman who had recognized him. Roberto stared at her, and the question forced him to reflect on his true identity. A heavy silence fell over the room for several seconds. Everyone was absorbed in the story they had just heard. The humiliated cleaning man had become a tragic and noble figure in everyone's eyes. Well, said Valentina, trying to regain control of the situation, her voice sounding artificial. It was a deeply moving story, but now... I think there's a promise to keep now, said the music critic, his eyes shining brightly. Valentina turned pale. What are you talking about? You said you'd marry him if he played better than a professional musician, he replied. And from what I've seen... Murmurs of approval echoed through the hall. Valentina looked away. Everyone was supporting the joke. She tried to protest. It didn't seem like a joke at the time, said a voice from the crowd. Look at the people around you. Just as you had arrived there. What was the situation? He watched silently, as if absorbing everything. He could see the weight of the situation settling on him. Part of him recognized the consequences of his cruel action. But another part, the part that had cultivated compassion over the last 5 years, felt something different. Perhaps we should clarify the terms of that promise, he said calmly. Everyone turned to him in surprise, Valentina included, with a mixture of hope and skepticism in their eyes. Finally, Roberto continued, Marriage is too important a decision to be made on a simple bet. Roberto's words brought a momentary relief to Valentina's face. However, this relief was short-lived. The crowd around them did not seem willing to let the matter rest so quickly. No, 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 complained the burly businessman who had placed bets earlier. A promise is a promise, especially when made by someone in your position, Valentina. I agree, said an elegantly dressed woman. You can't just give up now. That would be cowardly. Valentina looked around the room, noticing that the situation was slipping through her fingers, completely out of her control. The same guests who moments before had been sharing laughter with her were now demanding that she fulfill a promise she never imagined she would have to keep. Please, everyone, she tried to argue, her voice trembling a little higher. You can't be serious. I'm Valentina Montero. Do you really believe I would marry someone like him? Roberto replied calmly, interrupting her. Share a space with a cleaning employee, with someone they see as inferior? The silence that followed was... Valentina felt she had fallen into a trap of her own making. That's not it, she replied quickly. It's that you think we're trash, Roberto added, his voice calm but laden with shaken dignity. Roberto's words, which pointed to the invisibility to which they were relegated, made the guests feel uncomfortable. Many of them had employees in their homes, such as maids, drivers, and gardeners, and Roberto's words made them question how they treated these people. It was at that moment that a voice echoed from the back of the hall. Someone Everything was filmed, and everyone turned to look at a young man with his mobile phone in his hand, wearing a mischievous smile. 5 minutes ago, I posted it on TikTok and already have 1,000 views. Valentina felt her face burn. What had he done? The young man's performance was exceptional. He remained excited, and his marriage proposal will surely go viral. Other guests began to check their own mobile phones, and in a few seconds the hall was filled with exclamations. It's on Instagram too. Was it shared on Facebook by accident? My God. The video was on Twitter, with the hashtag #Faxinirtuos. Valentina felt like she was living a nightmare, her shame being broadcast to the whole world. In a few minutes, thousands of people would see the moment she had promised to marry Roberto. 20,000 views, someone exclaimed. 50,000, 100,000. Guys, this is going to go viral. Roberto watched everything, torn between fascination and apprehension. As the situation took on unimaginable proportions, his concern was evident. You need to think about this carefully. Your reputation is at stake. My reputation? Valentina almost shouted. My reputation will be ruined. Your reputation will be a broken promise. Her friend corrected her. Imagine the headlines. Billionaire, arrogant, promise breaker. Do you want to be remembered as someone who doesn't honor their commitments? The idea plagued Valentina's mind. She looked at the young man with the mobile phone. It's on TV, shouted someone who had just received a call. The news channel had picked up the video. Valentina felt her legs go weak. A national scandal. Maybe, whispered a voice. I think we've been diplomatic enough. Valentina agreed readily. Anything was better than the attention she was getting at that humiliating moment. Very well, said the music critic, clapping to get everyone's attention. How about we give them some space to sort this out? But the crowd seemed eager to see how the story would unfold. 500,000 views were already guaranteed. The guy with the mobile phone was almost there. Shouting with excitement, Roberto exclaimed, "This is history in the making, folks." He held out his hand to Valentina. She contemplated the offered hand for a long moment. 5 years ago, she could never have dreamed of touching someone like Roberto's hand, but now that hand seemed to be her only hope. Reluctantly, Valentina touched Roberto's hand. The contact was intense, charged not with passion, but with a mutual recognition of the desperate situation they found themselves in. Is there somewhere we can talk in private? Roberto asked. Valentina agreed. The administration office is on the second floor. As they made their way to the hall exit, Roberto and his entourage were followed by a curious crowd. Roberto turned to the guests and, in a naturally authoritative voice that silenced them, said, "Please, let us resolve this in a civilized manner." There were a few murmurs of disagreement, but in the end, people agreed to keep their distance. Roberto and Valentina walked silently through the hotel corridors, each lost in their own thoughts. Inside the lift, the silence was deafening. Valentina stared at her luxurious shoes, unable to form words. Roberto watched the numbers rise, ruminating on how his life had been completely transformed in less than 2 hours. 1 million, he muttered, looking at his mobile phone. Roberto did not reply, absorbed in his own concerns at that moment. When Valentina closed the door behind them, the silence intensified. Then she said, her voice breaking, "What do we do now?" Roberto sat down, thinking. "That depends on you, on me." Valentina smiled bitterly. "You just destroyed—" "I didn't destroy anything," Roberto replied calmly. "I just accepted a challenge you threw down. Your own choices." Valentina moved to the other side of the office. "You don't understand. I have an image to preserve." "What kind of image?" Roberto asked, inquiring. "Your behavior," Valentina protested. But marrying someone. At this moment. What if I said I understand?" Valentina stopped walking. "What are you talking about?" "Gala, high society events. I know firsthand. So, as you know, I didn't get up from the chair." Roberto, intensity. "Valentina, you have a choice. Succumb to tears of anger and frustration, or don't let them consume you." "Don't analyze me," she said, acting as she always did. "When you have everything, it's easy to forget the meaning of human simplicity." Valentina turned to the window. Do you think it's simple to carry the burden of an empire? To make decisions that impact thousands of lives? That doesn't make it acceptable to treat people as inferiors. He continued, his voice soft. You called me invisible. I said I was born to clean up other people's messes. Valentina. He closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the words resonate within him. Anger consumed him. She had ruined his dress, and that made him feel less complete, less human. She turned to look at him, and for the first time that night, Roberto saw a change in her eyes. There was no more arrogance, only remorse. No, she admitted in a low voice. It doesn't. Roberto approached her. Valentina, I don't want to force you into anything. I don't want you to marry me because of pressure. Just because, he stammered, genuinely confused. I want you to understand that your words carry weight. That all people, regardless of their occupation, have the right to be treated with respect. And if I apologize publicly, would that be enough to erase this episode from the wedding? Roberto shook his head. It's not just about me, Valentina. It's about the person you want to be. I don't know who I want to be. She exploded, her facade of control crumbling. I've dedicated my life to being what others expected. The perfect heiress, the ruthless executive. Tears streamed down her face. Do you think that's being her? Waking up every day knowing that hundreds of lives depend on your decisions? Roberto felt an unfamiliar emotion pulsing in his chest. It was the first time he had seen the real Valentina, a woman overcome by fear and overload. No, he replied softly. It can't be easy to carry that burden, and now I have to deal with the guilt of hurting someone innocent because of a misunderstanding, because I was only thinking of myself that day. Roberto watched her, recognizing the genuine pain in her eyes, and now she understood the error of her ways. Knowledge doesn't change what I did. No, but... Valentina slumped heavily in her chair. What do I do now, Roberto? She asked. Roberto walked towards her. That depends, he replied. Do you want to grow from this situation? What are you talking about? Do you want to use this as an opportunity, a chance to become the person you can really be? Valentina was silent, absorbing his words. Roberto smiled. And what kind of person do you want to be? Someone who uses their power to do good, replied Valentina. How about we make a deal? Valentina asked, curious. What kind of deal? Marriage shouldn't be a decision made on impulse. How about different? Will you help me get back into music? My career? Valentina stared at him, surprised. Would you give up marriage? Marriage was never my goal, Roberto said. The purpose was dignity, respect, a chance to start over, and that, with humility and empathy. Consider it a deal. Valentina stood up and held out her hand. Roberto, I accept the deal. Roberto shook her hand, and they... Shall we go back and tell them our decision? Let's go, she agreed. But what about my makeup? A student needs to look presentable, initially in 5... Ready? She asked, and the world changed. Roberto and Valentina witnessed something surreal. The party had completely changed. 2.5 million views, she announced, cutting off the flow of conversation. A deathly silence fell over the hall. Valentina, she took a deep breath. I would like to sincerely apologize. A murmur of surprise spread through the crowd. I treated Roberto horribly today. I called him invisible. I taught him that he had no value, and that was terrible. Roberto looked at her with a look of restrained approval. I realized that Roberto is an exceptional artist who prioritized his parents, giving up his career. This attitude demonstrates an admirable character that I aspire to have. The guests expressed surprise at Valentina's words, as they did not recognize the woman who was speaking at that moment. Regarding the promise I made, Valentina continued, Roberto and I have reached a consensus. What kind of agreement? Asked the music critic. Roberto then stepped forward to explain, Valentina will help me restart my musical career. In return, I will be able to help her broaden her view of the world. Roberto will teach me to see people differently, said Valentina. To treat everyone with the respect they deserve. And do you agree with that? The question was directed at Roberto. A forced marriage would benefit no one, but the possibility of mutual growth could transform lives. Donna Marina approached, her eyes brimming with tears. Roberto, will you play again? Roberto fixed his gaze on the piano. I will return, Donna Marina, and this time I will play not only for the powerful, but for everyone. And for everyone how? Valentina asked. Charity concerts, music for all, using art to connect people. Valentina's eyes sparkled. I realized that I could sponsor this gradually. Roberto could talk to the employees without making them feel invisible. Valentina blushed, but Rio also seemed to vibrate with the idea. The music critic approached, interested in the story. Roberto wanted to write about it, but added that, to be complete, it should also include Valentina's transformation, as it was the story of two people who helped each other grow and improve. 3 million views, exclaimed the young man. Valentina. She looked at the faces of the guests around her. They were no longer expressions of mistrust, but of interest, some even charged with emotion. There's something I'd like to do, she said. Valentina turned to Mrs. Marina. Mrs. Marina, how many years have you worked here? 23 years, ma'am. And in all these years, have I ever greeted you by name? Have I ever asked about your family? Ma'am, the answer is no, isn't it? She held out her hand. Isn't it? I treated you like you were furniture, Mrs. Marina. It's a pleasure to meet you. Indeed, this time, Mrs. Olhus. The pleasure is mine. Call me Valentina and tell me about your family. Others show genuine interest. You know, commented the employee, it never occurred to me to think about what happened to you. It's never too late for a change, replied Roberto. Could you show me how? Other voices joined in, suggesting treating people better. How about we form a group to create more welcoming work environments? I love music, Roberto added, picking up the microphone. Music brings us together and shows us that we can always be better. He was inspired by the events of the evening. It was